Good evening and welcome to the inaugural Sarasota County Schools Digital Town Hall. I'm Catherine Ferrara and I will be moderating tonight's event. Tonight we're expanding into new territory, a live streaming question and answer event that will be broadcast on Facebook, the district website at sarasotacountyschools.net, and on the Education Channel, airing on Frontier Channel 33 and Comcast Channel 20. Our goal is to get you answers to your questions on curriculum, budgeting, transportation, and others. We will dive into as many questions as we can in the next hour and get answers from the people who know. This town hall format is interactive and engaging. We've already received so many questions from you through email. But if you have a question tonight for our guests, you can submit them on the Sarasota Schools Facebook page in the comments section of the live feed, or submit them on Twitter at Sarasota Schools. Let's meet our guests tonight.
Hi, I'm Caroline Zucker, and I'm chair of the Sarasota County School Board.
Good evening. I'm Todd Bowden, Superintendent of Schools here in Sarasota.
Laura Kingsley, Assistant Superintendent for Academics.
Scott Limpy, Assistant Superintendent for Operations.
And Mitzi Corcoran, Assistant Superintendent, Chief Financial Officer.
And our social media team tonight.
Candace Magalia, and I'll be monitoring social media.
And I'm Scott Ferguson, and I'll also be monitoring social media.
Great. So let's get started with our first question. One that's on everyone's mind tonight is given the concern over Hurricane Irma. So, Dr. Bowden, first and foremost, how and when does the district decide when it's the right time to close a school in a weather-related event? And I know everyone will have a little bit of feedback on this, so let's start with you.
Certainly, that process starts with the activation of the Emergency Operations Center with Sarasota County government, of which we are a very active participant in. A lot of the need to close schools is driven by activation of shelters. Right. So it's a process in which we get lots of different feedback. As you get closer to the time that you make a decision, you start to bounce it off more and more people and try to decide what the right thing is to do. Today alone, probably made 15, 20 phone calls before we finally made a final decision, including people like the superintendent in Manatee County and Charlotte County, as well as emergency management, our board, just trying to figure out what the right thing is to do, understanding that when you close schools, it does create a hardship for some of our families in that if their place of work is still operating, but schools are not, it kind of creates a conundrum for them in regards to what do I do with the kids that day, but also understanding that people have varying experiences with hurricanes, and some try to get out a little bit earlier than others. And so, the questions started in my office as soon as we returned from Labor Day. We started receiving phone calls about what is the status of schools. And I think we landed in a really good place, is that we've gone ahead and closed on Friday. I know that Charlotte County is closing on Thursday and Friday, whereas Manatee is doing the same as us, closing Friday.
Okay. And Scott, from a transportation view, it's a bigger picture. It's not just closing schools, but transportation is also an issue in terms of closures.
Sure, and before I go there, I just want to piggyback on something Dr. Bowden said, the incredible value of our relationship with Sarasota County Emergency Management, not just for hurricanes, but for everything from pipe ruptures to just lots and lots of reasons that we really value our relationship with them, and it is a powerful and positive relationship. There are a lot of behind-the-scenes things, though, and one of them is transportation. One of the first things that we talk about is our persons with special needs. If I'm bed-bound and I need to evacuate, how does that happen? Much of that happens with school board transportation. So we reach out to those folks, we ask them, do they intend to evacuate? We essentially build a bus route around where they are, and we bring them to our shelters.
So it's really a community partnership between the schools, the EOC, special needs, people who need it. It's not just we're closing schools and leaving it as a one-way.
That's absolutely correct. As soon as you make a decision to close schools, you deliver that last kid home, and then you immediately change gears and begin a shelter operation. And so, it's very possible that Friday is going to be a beautiful day outside, but people are going to be working behind the scenes to get shelters ready to open, because there are certain benchmarks in which they try to determine 36 to 48 hours prior prior to the storm's arrival, where certain things have to take place. And so our schools transition from being places of learning to shelters, and there's some time needed for that to take place.
One of the specific things I apologize, one of the specific things we talked about is food. So when you show up at a shelter, there's some expectation that while I'm there, somebody's going to feed me.
Right.
And as Dr. Bowden talks about that transition from education to shelter, it's do you have food in the right place? What are the designated shelters? Is there food in schools that may lose power, and so you move that to the shelters? So just a lot of behind-the-scenes things that happen to make those shelter experiences successful.
And some of the schools that are shelters are for pets too, so there's an added component there to bring all that together.
One of the things that we should be aware of when we talk about closing schools is the fact that the parents are still going to work, and the children are therefore left at home alone most times without food, because over 50% of our students are on free and reduced lunch. So we feed them breakfast, lunch, and dinner, plus weekend we send them backpacks home. So it's really important that you understand the whole scope of what it is for us to call to close a school. It's more than one thing.
We've already gotten a lot of feedback on social media concerning the current status of schools, which you had said we are closed on Friday, but school is in session on Thursday.
Yes.
Correct?
And based on the forecast, Thursday will be a full operational day for us. Big night for many of our high school students. We have a college night scheduled Thursday night. We had enough advance notice that we moved off of Friday nights to Thursday night, so there'll be some athletic events. And so Thursday will be a full day for us to include extracurricular, which is real important.
Okay. Now, I know some parents have already asked questions. If they decide to evacuate and leave tomorrow, will the absences be excused?
Yes. Each one of our schools has a notification process. Some carry passports, notebooks. There's a system of requesting an excused absence. And so they still need to utilize those processes at their individual school sites and indicate that for family reasons they've held their child out of school on Thursday.
Okay. And then looking ahead into next week, can you say how that process will go and determine?
Well, you know, we have a lot of information available to us on the arrival of the storm. It's hard to gauge the impact of the storm and what the recovery looks like.
Right.
And so we've kind of gauged our efforts in preparation, survival, and recovery. And so once the storm has passed, we'll go through an assessment process to determine the conditions of our schools.
Right.
Another variable we have to consider is many times the people in our schools as shelters are not from Sarasota County. And so we have to await for them to receive the all clear so that they can vacate shelters and return to their homes. And so there'll be an assessment process that we'll go through. And so we'll use a variety of media. That's probably the number one question now is the decision to close has been articulated.
Right.
Now, when are you opening back? And so the assumption is that the storm will pass and we'll be open on Monday morning. That may or may not be the case. And so it's very important that you follow us on Facebook,
Right.
Twitter, the district website, local media, that we'll use every possible media available to us to let you know whether or not there'll be school on Monday.
Right, and the Sarasota Schools app as well,
Absolutely.
be pushing notifications to parents to get those out.
Dr. Bowden talked about the assessment process. I'd reinforce that happens with a real sense of urgency. As you listen to emergency managers talk, one of the things that they talk about after a storm is getting back a sense of normalcy.
Right.
And one of the key components to that is getting kids back in school.
Yes.
So there will be an assessment. We'll make sure that our schools are safe before anybody goes back, but we'll do that with a sense of urgency just to give families back that feeling of normal post-storm.
Great,
Can I add to this?
absolutely.
So, I know there is this sense of urgency and anxiety that, is there water in the store? Have I stood in line? And I think I just want to make our viewers aware that children feel that urgency and that anxiety. And so when you think about how to talk to your child and how to help them through those anxious times, I just want to remind parents that children are no different than we are, right? When we're anxious or afraid, we want someone to listen to us. We want someone to remind us that there are really other calming things we can do. We can breathe and we can read. Okay, I'm always going to remind us to go back to the reading, right? So I was at Gulfgate and one of the counselors brought me this book, When I Feel Afraid. It's a great children's book. But it just made me think, parents can pull out a classical book when there's no electricity and read to their children. Do you remember being read, Charlotte's Web? Or one of my all-time favorites is the one where the child is in the woods and on an adventure. It's a perfect one called My Side of the Mountain for an adventure, right? So just reading
to
is
keep in mind.
Yes.
When we're dealing with multi-sensory things. So I know we're going to have more on the storm that we want to recap at the end. So I do want to move on to some of the other email questions we got in. One is about budget. So Mitzi, talking about how the school budget is formed, what goes into that, how is that big picture assembled? We have an email from Caroline, and I know our Caroline will also want to chime in as well, but we'll start with you.
Well, our budget, we have a phrase that we like to use called the cone of uncertainty. So we start with this wide gap of not knowing what our funding will be at the beginning of the next school year, how many students are we going to have. But we go ahead and start the budget preparation process, first and foremost using a formula-driven process, and we project the number of students we're going to have at a school. We allocate staff based upon the class size amendment, where we can't have any more than so many children in a classroom in our core classes. We allocate our consumable supplies to our schools in that fashion. So, and then as the months progress and the legislature zeroes in on the budget for the state, which is ultimately what our budget ends up becoming, then we're better able to identify how we will end up by the end of the school year.
Right, and then from there it's allocated into STEM, into different reading programs.
Into different programs, right. Advanced placement programs, IB programs. We have our summer learning academies that receive funding. So all of those different items are funded from the allocations that we receive from the state and also from our voted referendum.
Great. And Caroline?
Right. We begin our budgeting process immediately after we close 1 year.
Right.
So we start that. We start for the next year, and every month we do another. Like 1 month we do the capital, the next month we do the operating, and we go back to capital and to operating. We do this throughout the year so that when we come to the end of the year, there are no surprises.
Right.
We know exactly how much money, where we're allocating it, and where it'll be spent on. Our only problem that comes into play for us is that sometimes the legislature does not give us the allocation until very late in the process, like what happened this year. And that then throws us all off.
Right.
And again, this year, we had to share, we shared of our dollars with our charter schools, our referendum and our capital dollars. But the legislature this year told us to share more of our dollars, and that came in at the end in a bill that was really a train, and we were not prepared for it at all. And that came out of our capital fund, which then did not allow us to purchase property to build an elementary school. So all of those variables come into play when we're doing our budget.
Right, but it's a fluid process like
Very
you were
fluid.
describing,
Very.
that it's constantly moving, it's never set in stone from day one.
That's why people have not got, they should not get upset when they see one number and 2 months later they see another number, because it's constantly moving.
Exactly. Laura, a question from you, from Talia, on special needs. She wants to ask, how does the group method of teaching help specifically for special needs students?
So, I think there are lots of ways to teach special needs children, right? So group method, if I understand the question, that's a whole class where a teacher is giving information to the whole class, and that helps children along with working one-on-one with them and working in small group with them. So there are many modalities that our teachers are equipped with in order to meet the needs of children. And it may not be one particular method. So
how is that determined then? Maybe, is that a quick kind of answer to look at? Like, is it engagement, individually? Is it looking at the group, what works best for them? How does a teacher determine how to do that?
By content, too. Like, does a teacher have one lesson to teach, one concept to teach that is better taught with the whole group? And then, you know, children learn a lot from their peers, too. So if children are paired up and they work together on that concept, that's another way. So I think the teacher determines it based on content and based on the individual learning needs of the child.
Okay.
You'll hear us use terms like least restrictive environment or inclusion, and what that really means is we try to leave those children in a traditional classroom environment whenever possible. We never want to single them out or pull them out of a classroom, or really to kind of highlight their exceptionality. Our goal is to leave them in a traditional classroom environment, to leave them in those groups, but to support them and recognize their individual educational needs. And so you hear terms like inclusion, least restrictive, is we want them to be in a traditional classroom environment at all times. So it's a pretty high bar where we try to exclude students and pull them into a different environment. Our objective always is to leave them in the classroom.
And really looking at what's the benefit of the student, not deciding the best overall. Social media, I understand we're getting some feedback and some questions.
We are. We have a lot of feedback, and I think it's important just to remind people, too, that this town hall is not just about the weather, because we are getting a lot of weather-related questions and people wondering why we're talking about reading instead of the weather. So I just want to remind people that this was a pre-planned event, and we have a lot of questions that were already sent in via email about reading and curriculum. But we do have another question about curriculum from Molly. She says, I've read a lot in the news lately, this is through Facebook, about various reading programs in the school system. My first grade son is struggling in reading and is not doing well with iReady. What is being done for struggling readers like him? Laura, this might be one that you can jump in on.
Well, so we're lucky enough to have a program for first graders where we have reading recovery teachers. They're highly trained literacy experts that can work with our lowest performing first graders. So my advice to the caller or the writer of that question is to definitely seek out their principal at their school and talk with their principal, make sure the principal is aware that they feel like their child is struggling, and the principal can notify the reading recovery teacher. And even if they don't see them in the morning for the reading recovery, they have opportunities to see children who are struggling in the afternoon also. So there is help. They just need to make sure they talk with the child's teacher, and the school will help in any way. The principal will make sure of it.
Great.
And we have a question from Twitter. Jason writes, with the referendum coming up, can you tell us how that helps our schools and where that money goes? Perhaps Mitzi Corcoran could answer that.
The referendum is very valuable. Right now, we're anticipating it will bring in about $56 million this year, and we use it to pay for a 30-minute additional instructional day for every student. It pays for elementary science teachers. We have science labs in every school that was provided through a grant, and that allows us to fund an individual teacher rather than it being their regular classroom teacher. We have art and music teachers, our visual performing arts, all of the different various arts programs out there, dance teachers and so on. And then we have additional guidance counselors in our school. What else do we have? Media personnel, the reading recovery teachers for non-Title I schools that Laura was just speaking of, technology support, campus security. It pays for a multitude of things that help our students.
For new residents who have come into Sarasota might not have heard the history of the referendum, how often does it come out, and when is the, should say the vote, so we remind people about that as well.
The referendum by statute is allowed for no longer than 4 years.
Okay.
Our current referendum was approved by 77% of our voters in March of 2014, so it will be up for renewal in March of 2018. And we're very much hoping for their support. It does represent a large percentage of 13% of our total revenue. So it does a lot of good work.
And supports the budget.
Referendum has the ability to allow us to be the great school system that we are. Without the referendum, we could not have art and music in our schools, nor could we have the extra 30 minutes, which might not seem like too much to you, but believe me, for our students, that's a lifeline. We are also talking about using some of the referendum dollars to help us with our summer program. So before you enter pre-K, you will be in a summer program, and then you will enter kindergarten, so that you'll understand that what the classroom looks like, what the materials look like, and then you're going to go into kindergarten, and then between kindergarten and first grade, we will also have summer school, because that's to alleviate the summer slide that we see so often in our students, especially in our low socioeconomic struggling students. So the referendum has the ability to help us in all of those areas.
Great.
One of the numbers that you heard Mitzi say was a 77% yes vote. Just think for a minute what that says. As general elections go, a 77% yes vote is a landslide.
Exactly.
And when we talk about that number, we talk about it kind of from a good news, bad news, or at least a kind of a good news challenge perspective. The good news is it says something about how the voters of Sarasota County value public education in a way that, as the board chair just said, we take very seriously. I think the challenge, though, is with that $56 million and that 77% yes vote comes an expectation on the part of those voters that we're doing smart things with their money. That's a responsibility that we take very seriously every day as we talk about the competing interests for that money.
Right.
Can I mention something?
We have a school advisory council committee that is in charge of looking at how we spend the referendum dollars. And they monitor us, they monitor our spending, and they're also making a recommendation as to whether we should continue with the 1 mil or not. So, I mean, we have checks and balances to make sure that we're doing the right thing with our money.
Right.
Can I just add, I think, Scott, isn't that all of the information on the referendum and how we've spent the money, isn't there a historical look at that on our website?
It's included as a part of the general fund budget. It's an appendices at the end of the budget from the original approval in 2002 to today.
Great.
And if they want more information, I think there's access to that on our
Absolutely.
website.
It's on the school board website.
Yep.
Great.
So just timelines, if we could.
Sure.
We will, in our next workshop, which is Tuesday, September 19th, we'll be looking at the kind of the ballot language and the authorization for the referendum, with the expectation that we will return to our board and ask for formal authorization to renew the referendum. That'll take place at our first meeting in October. Working with the supervisor of elections, we have tentatively set Tuesday, March 13th of 2018 to be the next election date, in which we are hopeful that our community will continue to support the referendum and the great things it does for our schools.
Great. So I'm sure we're definitely going to be talking more about it in the coming weeks and months, so we will definitely stay on that. Safety and construction has come up, Scott, from Maria and Kate and Daryl, asking about construction updates at several schools, and I know we implemented new security measures at other schools over the summer. Can you elaborate on those?
Sure, and I guess I'll talk about it in as general sense as I can so that it applies to, or is applicable to as many people as it can be. But we have really focused our energies on a number of things relative to the safety and security of our campuses. Much of the capital investment that you see is in two areas. One is to provide what we refer to as single point visitor access control. Right. If you think about the way that we built and designed campuses in the late 80s, for example, when some of our elementary schools were built, that date is pre-Columbine. And so you thought about safety and security a bit different before Columbine High School. So what single point visitor access does is says, let's look at those campuses that today appear to be pretty open and think about a way that you can put a physical security apparatus in place that forces visitors through a single point. So you can't just wander onto a campus through the back door, but you're forced to go through a single point where you are met by a trained receptionist. That receptionist would run you through essentially a sexual predator database called Raptor. They make make sure that your background is clean, and they give you a sticker, and then they physically allow you onto the campus, generally with an electronic lock that lets you to the student side of the campus.
Right.
So that's what most of what you're seeing occurring this past summer is about.
And the security enhancements that you're talking about come through like your driver's license. That's what's scanned
Yes.
to know your background, who you are, identify that you are a resident
Right.
of Sarasota, but then also having somebody who gives you a visitor badge or
Right.
a lanyard at some schools to
Sure.
identify.
And if you want to see what that looks like, I can steer you to a couple of places. Sarasota High School. If you think, those of you who remember Sarasota High School prior to the renovation, wide open campus. In fact, I used to joke that you drop pieces of popcorn as you go to the office so you can find your way back to your car. Not the case anymore. You know exactly where the front door is. There is a fence that forces you into a single point visitor access point at Sarasota High School. We just, in fact, Dr. Bowden and I were talking about it earlier today, we just completed a similar project at Venice Middle School. Not only has it made it a much safer school in terms of access, but I think the arrival experience is a whole lot more pleasant than it was prior to our investments there.
And construction updates on schools. I know there was a couple of projects in the works. Can you elaborate on the?
Sure. So there are probably three big ones, Sarasota High School, Pineview, and Venice Middle School. So I'll give you a fast update on each. Sarasota High School, we are just about done. It was a three-phase project. We're at the end of the third phase. We just opened Building 5, which is the old Rudolph Gym. We just opened that to an art department and junior ROTC at the beginning of school this year. There's some renovations remaining in their field house, and then that renovation is complete.
Okay.
And if you reflect back on the old Sarasota High School, it is night and day in terms of the experience of the kids.
It is.
Particularly the science labs. If you want to get excited about something, go in the Sarasota High science labs. Pineview School is a big renovation in terms of dollars. It is mostly about mechanical systems, air conditioning, and things like that. While we're there, though, we're doing some major improvements relative to safety and security and addressing some water intrusion issues. Pineview will run probably through winter break of 2018.
Okay.
When you have 2,000 kids on a campus that you're working on, we find that we best hopscotch across the campus. So you move teachers out of a building into some portables, you renovate that building, move them back in, and then move to the next building.
Trying to minimize as much distraction and construction going on.
Right, but what that does is extend your timeline. So when you say, gosh, why is it going to take till winter of 2018 to get there? It's because we're working around 2,000 students. And the last one I would mention is Venice Middle School. We're at the very front end of Venice Middle School. It is mostly, again, about mechanical systems, but a lot is going to happen on that campus. And when we're done, interestingly, when we started the project there, it was part about bringing our kids back to Venice Middle School. There was a time, Dr. Kinsey, you remember, but there was a time when the enrollment there was dipping below 400, I think. We just went through our staffing and added staff at Venice Middle School because their enrollment now is climbing above 700. So some of that, I think, is about the experience you have at that school. And then I said 3. I probably should have said 4. The big one, if you're a resident in Northport, is
That's what I was waiting for.
I was over here going.
if I would have forgot it, Dr. Bowden would have reminded me.
I was ready.
So really a lot to be proud of in Northport. The STC Northport campus, which today is combined with a county library, and the city of Northport funded a conference center on that campus. 15 elected officials, 3 local governments that all in a very collaborative way came together, said what are the needs in the city of Northport. Right now the plan is to open that campus on October the 16th. I shouldn't say the plan, it will open on October the 16th. We are going to have a formal ribbon cutting on November the 7th, so anybody who wants to join us, I'm sorry.
It's the 9th.
I'm sorry, what did I say? November the 9th. So anybody who wants to join us, very, very exciting project, particularly for the citizens of Northport.
Great. We look forward to that. We got an email from Emily, Caroline, asking about why we switched back to an earlier start date in the school year.
Well, I myself would prefer the later start date, but listening to all of our principals and teachers, they feel that it's better for the students to begin a week earlier because they'll end up before the winter break and allows the students to have 2 full 3 weeks of not having to worry about testing. And we also are able to get our test results back earlier in June, so that we're a little bit ahead of the curve right now. Our children are leaving school at the end of June or end of May, and we still don't have their test results back. And how do you place somebody in the next grade when you don't know exactly what classes they need?
Right.
So that's why I think it's much better for the student that we move the date back, even though I do understand the community and I understand your feeling, because my family lives in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and they go back after Labor Day. So I understand that you can't, plan your visits and plan your vacations the end of August, but it's much better for your students if we do it this way.
Now they can plan winter break, right? Without children having to study for midterms. Those high school students can really have a winter break.
Yep.
Exactly.
Start college early.
Exactly. From an operations standpoint, Scott, can you just lend a little bit of color to that about how the start times affect transportation and air conditioning? I mean, what does that affect how you plan your school year?
You bet it does. My background is military. I'm a retired military officer, and my friends in the military ask me all the time, so what do you guys do in the summer? Because there's this expectation that kids are out of school, there's nothing to do. I will tell you that nothing could be further from the truth. The summertime is where we do all of our heavy lifting. You already touched on construction, but it's where we do the deep cleaning of our schools. It's where we get our buses ready for the next school year. It's where we refresh our technology models in the schools that are due. So lots and lots of heavy lifting happens in the summertime.
Great. Go ahead.
Why don't you talk about the white glove program? Because I think that'd be interesting.
So probably one of the most thankless jobs of all the things that happen inside of an organization this big is being a custodian. How do you recognize a custodian? And so the program that Caroline's talking about, we call it the White Glove, is at the end of the summer, we send teams out to each of our schools. We do a very, very thorough inspection of their efforts to deep clean the schools. So thorough, I would tell you, one of the things we do, for example, is go into a bathroom, turn off the lights, and then light it up with a black light. And you'd be amazing what you can see with a black light in a bathroom. But it's a good way to look and see.
Not in our bathrooms.
Right.
Our bathrooms are clean.
Well, they are.
That's right.
And it's neat that you can see those kinds of things. And so as a parent, I say, how do I feel about, because cleanliness is about safety in its own right? And so very, very thorough. But the exciting part of this is when we're all done, we recognize those schools that come out on top. We bring those custodians to a board meeting, and in front of the school board, we recognize their efforts. And it's the one big celebration a year that celebrates the work of our hardworking custodial staff.
That's right. Social media is lighting up with some questions.
It is. We have a lot of questions coming in, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. We have one from Eve, and she wants to know about medical emergencies at school. She has a concern that there's no nurse to administer emergency medicine at school, and why is that the case? Why is there not a person who can administer emergency medicine at school? Would that be you, Todd?
Well, we staff our schools. Many of them do have registered nurses. It's based on the population of the school, be those students that have an IEP or a 504 plan that call for some level of medical intervention. But then, there are times that we have to call 911. The scope of practice of a school nurse is limited, and so there's very little emergency medicine that takes place on a school campus unless it is a student with a specific history, and then they have an intervention plan in which they're responding to specific directions they've been given in advance, that if this child were to have, as an example, a seizure, how should they respond?
Okay. Good deal. We'll
Any other?
Back to you.
Great. I know we talked about menus a little bit when we talked about shelters. So we do have a question that came in about healthy choices in the schools, how we determine the menu at schools. And Scott, how does your team work to get creative in the kitchen, I guess, and really create a menu that kids are going to want to eat?
Sure. Well, for those of you who remember, those of you who are my age and remember what school food looked like back then, I tell people all the time, it is no longer your grandmother's kitchen. The quality of food in our cafeterias today is dramatically improved. If you look at our menu, what don't you see? You don't see fatty foods. You don't see fried foods. You don't see a lot of dessert. There is a real focus legislatively at the federal level today on the quality of school lunches. So we monitor things like the caloric intake of our kids, things like fat content, things like sodium content. We have right now today, I would argue, probably the best food service team in the state of Florida. We have 7 registered dietitians on staff. They work very collaboratively together with the schools to develop menus. Probably one of the neatest things we have is each year the superintendent hosts a student forum. That forum is focused functionally, and one of the functional areas that kids talk about is the menu.
Right.
And so we can sit down with them, mostly high school kids, but we can sit down with them and talk about what do you like and not like about your school lunch, and then respond to the feedback we get from them.
Great.
We also have a group of students that come in every 3 months. They're called the STAR or the CYD students, and we talk to them and we answer back and forth questions. And a lot of times their main question is also around food and what kind of food is served and why can't we have better food and why can't we have pizza.
Right.
So we're very aware of the students' needs and what they would like and not like, and yet we have to weigh the nutritional value for what we serve to make sure we comply with everything. So it's really a balancing act that our director of food nutrition does a fantastic job.
Absolutely. And the feedback. And the feedback I hear from, parents that come in to have lunch with their students or teachers that are buying lunch, that there's such an array of choices that for an adult too, you leave feeling healthy and satisfied, just as you would feeling good about your kids eating lunch as well.
Right, and I'm glad to hear that. One of the really unique things, Mitzi and I were just kind of talking on the side here, one of the really unique things we have here is a pretty robust, what we call farm to school program. We recognize that there's lots and lots of produce that is growing right here in the state of Florida.
Right.
Why would you buy an orange in California when you can buy it right down the street? It does a number of things. It brings fresh fruit in. That fruit is ripening on the vine, not in the back of a truck. And it keeps the money, frankly, that we spend buying food local to Florida farmers. So a wonderful program, and helps the kids learn about. We were down at Inglewood Elementary School about a year ago, and we asked kids where do potatoes come from, and the answer was the grocery store. Until they met a potato farmer who talked to them and showed them pictures about how you grow potatoes.
That's
so
great.
Neat
That's
program.
great. Social media, you're getting some comments?
Yes, we are. We have a question that was sent by Debbie through Facebook. And she wants to know, are we testing too much? Why do we test? What do we do with testing results? So perhaps Dr. Kingsley could address that one.
Well, so that's always a question, right? Are we testing too much? And no one wants to test children, but we do need to have an indication of how well a child is learning what's needed for that grade level. So, it's very important that kids just feel no stress about testing, but instead look at it as a way to show their best, and this is what I have learned. If we didn't have testing, then teachers would struggle with, am I boring a child? Am I challenging a child just right? Am I challenging a child too much? Because we do want children to productively struggle with what they're learning. And if it's too easy, then we need to up the game, because we want children at all levels, whether they're really struggling learners or they're really children who need enrichment, we want them to shine. And, you can call it testing or assessment or whatever you want to call it. We need to do just enough that we have a good indication of what children need to learn next.
So there's this idea that if one test is good, then 10 tests must be better.
Right.
And so I think we have reached a peak in our testing. And certainly you saw in the last legislative session that there is a pushback from parents, from educators, and even within the legislature to say, maybe we've gone too far. And so I think we have peaked in the number of state-mandated assessments, and that number, I believe, will start to come down. The important thing is not to have a lot of tests, but to have really good tests that provide feedback to families and educators, that they perform a diagnostic that allow our teachers to respond to the needs of students. And as Ms. Zucker noted, getting those results back in a timely way is so important. And it's not just a high-stakes event in April, May, but it's something that can be used to inform instruction throughout the school year. So I think we have peaked in the number of state assessments. I think you will see that number start to roll back. We've done away with the state Algebra 2 end of course examination. There were others that they're going to look at, so I expect in the next legislative session they'll continue to roll back the assessment program.
So glad to hear that, really, because the teachers are the ones who know their children best, and it should be teachers who are assessing kids, not the state. Just a little editorial comment.
Right?
Any other social media?
We do. We have another question from Lauren, and she wants to know, this is probably could be a multiple answer from several of you. What are your main priorities and goals for the district during this school year? Maybe you want to start.
I know
here.
the board's main priority was to reduce chronic absenteeism, because if you're not in school, you can't learn. And then therefore your dropout rates go up, your suspension rates go up. So that's been our number one priority that the board's settled on.
So my contract is a little bit different than my predecessor, and so we went through an activity that I think was really good for a board and a new superintendent, and it involved some goal setting. It also involved, well, how do we know if we've achieved those goals? And so, you know, as I undertake this new role as superintendent, there are really three things that drive me. The first is to maintain that tradition of excellence. We are one of only 2 school districts in the state of Florida who've received an A from the Florida Department of Education every year that they've evaluated school districts, and so that's a 14 consecutive year streak. So job number one is to keep the A. You know, we talked about the referendum earlier. There's an expectation. Matter of fact, I believe Mr. Limpy used the word expectation, is that we have been blessed with additional resources, and in return there are high expectations for our school district. And so one of the ways the board will evaluate my performance as superintendent is to look at that point total and to make sure that we're continuing to move forward. The second is to make sure that our tradition of excellence extends to all of our students. And so you hear us talk about the lowest quartile or closing the achievement gap, is that we want to make sure that our high quality system is serving the unique needs of all of our kids. And so you hear us talking about getting down to the individual student level, serving the needs of every student every day. And so another measure that the board will evaluate my performance as superintendent is looking at that lowest quartile in reading and lowest quartile in math, and making sure that we're continuing to show learning gains for that lowest quartile. And then a goal that is just a personal driver of mine is just making sure that our commitment to this community and to our students extends beyond graduation. Is to make sure that all of our students are graduating with a real difficult decision to make. Do I go directly to post-secondary study, or this job that I've trained for is waiting on me? So we want all of our students to be college and career ready at graduation. So those are the 3 goals: maintain our tradition of excellence, make sure it extends to all of our students, and that it extends beyond graduation.
Great. Laura? I'm sorry.
One of the things that we have to be aware of as we focus on our lowest quartile is to make sure that those students that are in a higher quartile also are achieving at a higher level.
Correct.
Because the tendency is to focus in one area and to lose sight of getting someone from a 3 to a 5.
Right.
And then that's a balancing act that you have to do.
Which is something very big to celebrate too, because there's so much, you know, you make this benchmark and then that benchmark, but when you really cross into the next level, when you really cross from a 3 to a 5, or you get all 5s, it's really a moment to acknowledge what has happened and transpired from the teachers and the principals and the parents that all supported to bring that.
I know that. I have a grandson who just graduated from one of our schools with 5s.
Perfect. Congratulations.
Let me make I just want to make a comment about the value of those goals. One of the things that we've talked about is, how do you focus your energies? How do you know that you're spending your energy on those most important things? And in the absence of goals, you just kind of continue to do the same thing. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the setting of these 3 goals is it allows me as the operations guy to really focus our energies on things that make those goals happen. So as I sit down with my leadership team and we talk about, for example, how are we going to spend our capital budget? Every time we come up with a project or something that we would say, here's a place you'd spend money, we reflect back to those goals and say to ourselves, does this investment make one of those things happen? And if it doesn't, then maybe we ought to think about, is there a better way to spend the money? So just
not just spend it because you have it.
But
it's targeted, strategic.
Towards the accomplishment of one of those goals. So
it becomes a very key piece in allocating your resources.
If
you have set goals and you know how you want to achieve those goals, if you come to me with a program, if it doesn't meet any of those goals, then why would we allocate those resources for that? So it does give some real clear definition to an allocation of budget funding.
Good. And Laura?
We are just all behind those 3 goals.
Great.
You know, I will tell you that I think we achieved that excellence that Carolyn is hoping for due to our community, the support that we have in this community. I know we've already talked about the referendum. That support with our arts community, well, it extends even beyond the vote, right? It allows us to give children these extensive opportunities that they wouldn't have perhaps had. All children get to have the experience to go to the Van Wezel, to experience the Oslo or the Florida Studio Theater. So we have that kind of lovely support, but we also have a lot of foundation support, and they're all about helping the superintendent and all of our principals reach those goals.
Great. One of the things that you have to remember, and that I wouldn't, unless I were involved in the education department, I would not have thought about this. You think of Sarasota as a wealthy community, but you don't think about Sarasota as a low socioeconomic community. You don't think of Sarasota that there are children here who have never gone to the beach, who have never gone to the theater, who have never gone to the Oslo. You just don't think of that. But with our partnerships in this community, we have an ability to be able to take our students to the Oslo, to see a play, to see a ballet, which we would not have without the support of this community. This is a fantastic community that helps us every day. All of our foundations are behind us.
And those experiences make the well-rounded experience in the classroom, not just what we do. Social media, you're getting a lot of feedback.
We are. We have another question from Twitter. This one was tweeted by Robert, and he wants to know, it's perhaps a question for Mr. Lempe, are buses required to have or use air conditioning when it's so hot outside? And maybe the broader question is, how do we maintain our buses? What is our fleet like? What are our, our transportation goals, and how do we make that a positive experience for students?
Well, that's a mouthful. So let me.
Keep it short.
I'll try. So let me talk about. Let me talk about the air conditioning piece of the question first. No, there is no requirement to have air conditioning. Having said that, I will tell you that all of our routed buses, and the reason I say it that way is because I wouldn't include kind of spares, but all of our routed buses today are air-conditioned buses. We recognize that that's part of the experience. Particularly going to school, you want the bus ride to be pleasant, and the kid shows up in school ready to learn, not exhausted from the heat or mad at their bus driver. So that's a part of the learning experience. So all of our routed buses today have air conditioning. We have a bus fleet that is just short of 300 buses, runs probably 1,000 routes a day. We transport between 17 and 18,000 kids every day. We do most of our own maintenance in-house. We have the main garage fleet is an Osprey. Buses are inspected at least every 30 days, routine inspections to make sure that they're ready. And then at the beginning of every day, the driver has a checklist that they go through to make sure that, in particular, the safety features of the bus are all operating the way they should. But there's a ton that goes into making all that happen.
Great. And we just have a couple more minutes, so I want to get as many questions we can from social media.
Yeah, so I have 2 really good questions. I'll start with Daryl's question. He wants to know why we start high school so early. And so I don't know who wants to chime in on that one.
I can answer that.
Okay, Caroline.
We start high school early because transportation really drives the education system. It shouldn't, but it does. And our high schoolers have after-school jobs and places where they need to be. And if we weren't transporting our high schoolers first, we would be transporting elementary school. So can you imagine when daylight savings time kicks in and we have our little 6- and 7-year-olds out on the street corners waiting for a bus? Because we want to make sure that they go to school first because they're up early, and we want our high schoolers to go to school later? No, I don't think so. I don't think that would be a good formula. That's a formula for disaster, having those youngsters out on the streets that early in the morning. And the middle schools, well, our buses do 3 routes. They do elementary, middle, and high school. And that's what's required in us for us to be able to live within a somewhat meaningful budget, because the state only allocates 60% of our transportation budget, and the district picks up the other 40%. And that's a heck of a lot of money, so you want to make sure that you're getting the best bang for the dollars that you're spending on transportation, because it's a very expensive proposition.
It is.
Right. If we said, for example, that we wanted to have every kid start school at 8:30, we could make that happen with 3 times as many buses and 3 times as many drivers, and we just can't. What's the balance?
Right. The realistic of the situation.
Yep.
Sure. So if you put times on it, most buses do a 7:30 start, which is our high schools. Then we do an 8:30, which is typically elementary, and then a 9:30, which is middle school. And so the other decision that you see districts around the state contemplate is, do you switch one of those? And so I think that kind of the point you said was, well, if high school doesn't go at 7:30, who does?
Right.
Or do you do 8:30, 9:30, and 10:30? Right now, our middle school students are really kind of pushing the envelope. They're getting home at 5:30, 6 o'clock. You'd have to add an hour to that. They'd be arriving home at 6:37. So there are a lot of moving parts involved in that. And you see districts contemplate the change of high school start times, but it really touches so many facets of the operation that rarely do you see them act upon it.
Exactly.
Can I just mention something that you have mentioned before? Our high school kids also have a lot of after-school activities and athletics and sporting events that they want to get to also. So I think if we did change high school, we would hear from folks saying, what are you doing? This is really throwing off my schedule too.
Sometimes they're elementary school caregivers also.
Sure. Candace?
We have a few people commenting, Talia, Myra, and a few others commenting about EOCs and why they are necessary and when were they put in place. So who can comment?
All right, I'll take that one.
Okay.
EOC stands for end of course examination, and so when I was in school we called them final exams.
Yes.
And so an end of course examination is specifically content related. So you would take an end of course examination in algebra, biology, geometry, and that was the state's answer to the old FCAT, in which our students took an FCAT at the end of the year, but it was just a math test. It wasn't specific to the content found in an algebra or a geometry course. And so now the idea is we're not just testing for testing's sake, but we're testing with a purpose, which is to confirm that we've mastered algebra, geometry, and up until this year, algebra 2.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Any others?
Let me see. We are getting a lot of questions. I think people are also wanting to go back to the weather issue, so maybe just remind people we are going to be recapping that. This might be a good time to do that. Maybe.
A couple more minutes. We're going to recap the closures for current situations and then also how we are monitoring and getting information on our app and our Facebook, but we will get to that here in a minute. Is there anything from social media? Any other questions? Caroline, we did get an email question to talk about the relationship between the school district and the school board, how that partnership works together.
Well, the school board really sets policy and hires the superintendent, and the superintendent runs the schools. And that's sometimes a very difficult thing for people to understand, because the individual board members should not be running the schools. That is the superintendent's job. The only thing that we do is we hire the superintendent and we also approve the budget. And that is our main functions. And our attorney, we also hire the attorney.
Right.
And that's really key for people to keep that in mind when they're running for the school board or when they're working on the school board, that's the parameters. You're not in there to make big changes. You're not in there with your own special agenda. You're in there to support the system. To me, the system has always come first. It doesn't matter really what I think. It matters that the system is running well and that the system is providing the education for the kids that's necessary.
Right.
I think we really have the ideal system of governance. There's a couple variables that you see relationship between a superintendent and the board around the state. The first is the election of the board, is that we have 5 elected school board members. Each one of them has a district, but they run for county-wide. That's important. What you don't want is a school board member who was elected to serve their district and is not accountable to the entire county.
Right.
So what happens, you get very parochial, and they just say, I'm just here to advocate for the
schools
ones
here.
in District 5. So that's very important, is that our school board members run through the entire county, and they're accountable to the entire electorate. The second is, I'm an appointed superintendent, where about 2/3 of our superintendents statewide are elected, and I can tell you it changes the dynamic between superintendent and board, the way that they work together. And so I think it's very important that, you know, we stay with that appointed superintendent, but we continue to run countywide. That's, to me, is the best level of accountability.
Great. Anyone else?
Just a staff perspective, I guess. I have been working with and giving presentations to and workshopping with the board for about 14 years now, and I watch other local governments and how they interact. And if you ask me to categorize staff's relationship with the school board over that time, I think I'd use 2 words: mutual respect. I don't know that we agree on everything all the time, but we are always focused on what's in the best interest of our kids. We always treat each other and interact with each other on the basis of respect. And so just from this one staff guy's perspective, I've really enjoyed that relationship.
Good. Social media, any comments coming in?
We have someone asking about the start of the school day. We already covered that. And then back to, will school be closed on Monday?
Okay. Well, we're about
very
5 minutes
focused.
left in the town hall. Let's introduce that and remind people.
Well, the honest answer is I hope so. I hope that by midday on Sunday that Irma has moved on, that we've had a chance to assess our schools, and that we're open for business. That really is my expectation. If you said, where do you feel, you know, sitting here today, I feel like we're going to be in school on Monday morning. Looking at the current track, very fortunate. We took a little tick to the east. I think it will minimize the damage. And so my hope is that by midday on Sunday, we're communicating that schools will be open. As Scott said, that sense of normalcy. But it's very important to stay tuned. I mean, there's a lot of variables. We are still within that cone. I participated in a press conference today over at the Emergency Operations Center, and the message is don't be so concerned about the middle of that storm line. You're still in a cone, which means anything can happen. So yes, we kind of took a deep breath today, but I don't want to drop our guard in any way.
And for those viewers just joining us, remind us of the communication channels you'll be using to get that information out on schools.
Absolutely. We'll be using ConnectEd messages directly to our families, and so they'll receive a series of phone calls from us. We'll use the Facebook, Twitter, district website, and if you've not downloaded our new app, that is always the best way to communicate with us and receive real-time information.
Great.
And they can expect to know from you on Sunday that school will likely be open on Monday.
We hope so. There'll be a message of some sort arriving in their home.
Right.
Great.
Yep.
Caroline, I know we have a few minutes left. I know we're going to give you a chance to have final thoughts.
I think this was an excellent opportunity for us to be able to dialogue with our community. So we've tried in the past to hold community forums in our schools or in our community centers, and they have not been effective. We've also did some town hall call-in.
Right.
We did about 2 or 3 of them a couple of years ago. And we received a lot of feedback, but it still wasn't enough. I think that this is a much better forum because you can actually see the people, at least the community can see us and see our reaction to their questions. I think this is a really good format, and I hope that the community feels that way also. And I would, you know, I get emails for other things. I would like to have your feedback and send an email in to let us know if this was a good forum for you, if this is a good vehicle for us to be able to dialogue with you and to get our message out to you. I'd appreciate knowing that.
Great. Todd?
So as our first digital town hall, we intentionally tried to keep it broad and accept a wide range of questions, and certainly Irma was the pressing question of the day. But it is our hope that based on the feedback that we receive, that this develops into a series, and that we can do some specialized town halls in which we could talk, one of the questions is the referendum. We could talk we could probably talk for an hour just about the referendum, or we could talk about academic programs or how the capital budget is managed. And so we hope that this forum provides a forum for us to drill down on some specific topics as we move forward.
Right, and using it as another communication vehicle and dialogue between parents and the community and the schools to, share ideas and questions. And by social media tonight and by email, we receive so many comments, and even ones, we want to get to, and we'll definitely have that forum available.
Absolutely. When we talk many of the tools, we don't lack tools for communication. What we lack is the two-way aspect is I have lots of opportunities to send emails and tweets and go on Facebook, but it's the ability to hear your questions. There were some questions tonight that if I'd have just said, what are some topics I wanted to cover, we wouldn't have gone to. And so the two-way part of it is what I think makes this forum special.
Great. Laura, you look like you have something to say.
Just want to say thank you to you, Catherine.
Oh,
thank you for moderating this. You make it very easy.
Well, I hope to be doing many more. And it's very engaging as a parent to be able to share my perspective and hear your perspective. So hopefully it received the same feedback from everybody, and that's what we hope. So thank you to our guests today, and thank you to the community and you for joining us for our first ever digital town hall. We hope we got to as many questions as we could. We hope to do many more of these, like we said. Thank you for joining us, and good night.